Hello, my darlings, and welcome to the apocalypse. Welcome to Radio Wasteland, the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm your host, Chauncey Hallworth. This is my co-host, Kara Kittrick.
Hello.
Kara, what kind of awesome news do you have for us today?
So I want to cover an actual legit topic that is... Yeah, I know. I just thought as a change of pace. Like, it's funnier, I think, if we cover Bigfoot and UFOs and stuff, if sometimes we do, like, journalism, too, at the same time. I think it throws it into sharp relief. So anyway, I feel like this isn't getting a whole lot of attention in the American press. I mean, it is in newspapers, but not unlike the nightly news, and you have to go looking for it. And that is that leaders around the world, not really in the US, but around the world, are using the coronavirus as an excuse to increase their power and scrap democracy, just like the tinfoil hat guys said they would. So the biggest example, Hungary. Hungary's parliament just gave its leader, Viktor Orban, the ability to basically pass laws unilaterally, an ability that has no expiration date, is not legally tied in any way to the resolution of the crisis, and is already being used to pass laws that Mr. Orban just happened to want that have nothing to do with coronavirus. For instance, last week he declared gender transition illegal in Hungary, because that was the squeaky wheel in post-coronavirus Hungary. That's what needed changing. He also unilaterally passed reforms to the school system so that Hungarians can be, quote, proud of their history, which in this case means that history books will now be required to cover their Nazi involvement in World War II in a more positive light. In Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who, if you don't follow Israeli politics, you probably don't know, has been very unpopular with a large segment of the population, and has also been under investigation for taking bribes and just general corruption, has just so happened to decide that the courts need to be shut down for coronavirus reasons right before his trial was slated to begin. Also, this happened at a time when the courts were getting involved over a disputed election and were expected to give power to his opponents. Now they're shut down. Leaders in Jordan, Thailand, and the Philippines have given themselves the ability to basically censor any media they don't like. The interim president in Bolivia postponed their elections indefinitely. The UK is trying to give massive new powers to border agents and police. So, and of course, many, many countries, too many to list now, are trying to expand the surveillance capabilities to, frankly, a rather alarming degree. So these are just some of the many examples of what's happening right now in a lot of countries that don't have the same checks and balances that we do, and even in some that do. I mean, Israel is generally known as a fully functional democracy, same for Hungary, at least until Orban got into power. Back to you, Chauncey.
Okay, I think my first question is, what's the leader of the Philippines' name again?
Rodrigo Duterte.
Okay,
so he's been in the news
not the
a bunch
one.
of times for being a crazy person. But
yeah, well, there's one of them who's in the news for doing this, and I forget what country, but his last name is like the entire alphabet. It's like just insane. So I was trying to set you up. I was trying to set you up. Well, he was in the news about a year ago because the conspiracy theory was that he was dead, and he came out to show that he was alive by driving Brodies around a fire pit. And I don't know. We'll have to get the video up there. It is over the top. He also sings in a band with his son. Some of these dictators are just insane. Like you started out there talking about Turkey, and of course, gender transition.
Hungary. Yeah, not Turkey. Turkey, we all know, is fully on the dictatorship train now.
Right. Sorry. Turkey makes me think of Hungary.
That is fair.
The gender transition, I mean, what does that have to do with anything? I mean,
absolutely nothing.
Are they postponing all elective surgeries? I mean, that might make sense, but if it has anything to do with gender transition specifically, that is absolutely...
No, it's just a very conservative country, and he runs a far-right party, and now he has the power to rule by decree, so that's exactly what he's doing.
Right. Which you very much illustrated afterwards by saying that they were putting Nazis in a more positive light.
Yeah. Yeah, because they don't want the World War II section of history books to be a downer or
Right.
anything for the Hungarian kids.
Right. Because if anybody knows anything, it's that, over the past 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, the Nazis, man, they really got a bad rap.
God. Yeah.
That's like sign number one of dictatorship. We're going to go easy on the Nazis. Be all, somebody needs to shoot that guy.
Oh, gosh. Well, now Radio Wasteland is going to be censored in Turkey. Hungary. Gosh darn it, Hungary. Yeah. Why am I beating up on Turkey and ascribing all... The thing about Hungary, though, is, it's a member of NATO.
Right.
It is a perfectly functional state, or at least it was until right now.
Now, in this case, did they elect to give him these rights in the case of Hungary?
Well, so it's more of like a parliamentary system. So the executive is not separate from the Congress, like it is here. So rather, the executive is just sort of the leader of the Congress, like in, say, Britain, where the prime minister is just, the sort of the party leader. So yes, his party elected to give him these powers, and presumably the reason, because they have a majority control of the parliament right now,
right?
And presumably all the other party officials are fine with this, because they know that, maybe one day they'll be the chief bigwig of this particular party. And
right.
They'll be the ones with the unlimited dictatorial power. So,
when this was first going on, I saw it as an opportunity for Donald Trump to go down as one of the greatest presidents in history.
Yeah, back in January, maybe.
And we find out, no, even now he could. And because our two greatest presidents in the history of the United States are considered the greatest presidents for the exact same reason. Both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln had the opportunity. George Washington had the opportunity to seize absolute power, and he turned it down. Abraham Lincoln did seize absolute power, but still allowed elections to go on and then return the power to people after the war. That's why both of those guys are considered so great, because they're holding up these ideals. And so I thought, if Trump's smart about this, he could go down in history as the guy who gave power back. But I don't see it happening, but
I don't know that Congress is actually exactly champing at the bit to give Trump any more power.
Yeah. And then Israel, I'm always a little confused by Israel, because they're one of our closest allies, yet they're in a potential dictator situation. I don't understand how we are.
I think calling it a dictator situation is overstated.
Well, he shut down the courts before his own trial. I mean, it's weird.
I guess it's not overstating it by that much.
Yeah, I mean, it is a step towards that potential.
That is why this is so alarming. So basically, to go into a little more detail, what happened was that there was an election, and basically the opposition party won, but the results of the election were contested. It was sort of the Florida 2000 type of situation. So the courts basically said, okay, this opposition guy won. Now he has to create a coalition government in, the deliberative body. I forget what it's called. And they were expected to, make more rulings on that and enforce it more. But now Netanyahu is saying that the courts can't meet because, no gatherings.
Yeah, that's
I don't exactly know what's going to happen. And if you look at newspapers from that country, people are scared and freaked out, rightfully so, because this is kind of an unprecedented place. Not that I'm an expert in Israeli politics or anything. I don't want to try to get that impression.
No, I get you. And actually, this has been an issue for me over the years because I'm interested, especially here on Radio Wasteland. We have the opportunity, the platform to get somebody to teach us about this because Israel has always been interesting because it's pretty polarizing. And I've always been very curious, but I've always been too scared to have any sort of guest on that has an opinion on Israel. I need a third party. I need a because if you're too into Israel, maybe you're rosing it up. And if you're too opposed to Israel, there's a lot of things that could go on there. And so I've always been too scared to chase it down, but it is something that I've always wanted to know more about.
Yeah. Well, Netanyahu is very much on the expand, type of camp, but it is worth noting that that's not like a monolithic view in Israel or anything. Like the opposition left-wing party did win, and that's not necessarily their point of view on the situation.
I see.
So,
so there's a lot of people there that have the attitude of live and let live with Palestine and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think to some extent it is the leadership and the politics that, I mean, it's kind of like here. A lot of pandering happens to, relatively small groups of people in this country who happen to live in, electorally important places.
And people who show up to vote,
And yeah, more so that probably.
Yeah.
The voters,
Yeah, it's not too different from in the news right now. They're trying to either block or push through voting by mail because they're thinking that it'll change everything.
Yeah, which I don't know. I think Trump is kind of in a tough position with vote by mail because if he does pass it, then as he correctly pointed out, Republicans will have a very hard time in elections going forward, and if he doesn't, well, this election in particular is going to be difficult because who's going to stay home? Old people, which is his constituency. So my prediction, you heard it here first, is that the only way for the GOP to handle this is by just going whole hog with voter suppression. They have to make it very, very difficult for anyone to vote in the November election.
I'm thinking I was automatically thinking that we were going to go to this vote by mail. So let's put
no way.
Let's put $5 on it.
Okay, $5.
Yeah, but $5.
Republicans will never pass vote by mail. They will fight it to their dying breath.
Well, I know you're smarter about this stuff than I am, so I'm ready to lose that $5. But for the fun of it, I'm going to put that $5 up anyway. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. Up next, we have our guests, Derek Hayes and David Flora, who are making a movie called High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. Borrego is how you say it. And it's basically an area in eastern Southern California that is chock full of sightings all the way from Bigfoot to ghost lights to UFOs. There's just a massive amount of sightings there, and they're going to cover some of them with us. And, if you like what you hear, maybe you can reach out to their Kickstarter and give them the last little bits they need to finish the movie, although they are literally tens, maybe hundreds of dollars away from completing their Kickstarter. So it looks like this movie is a go, regardless of what you do. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. Come on back. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guests, Derek and David. We're going to talk about the movie that you guys are working on. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. The Borrego Triangle.
Uh-huh.
And but first, I figured we should cover, who you guys are and where you came from. You guys both came from, it appears, 2 different podcasts, Monsters Among Us and Blurry Photos. Is that right?
That's right.
So what's Monsters Among Us and what's their focus? I think that's you, Derek.
Yeah, that's me. It's a show I started about 4 years ago. Essentially, it's a call-in show about monsters of all kinds, ghosts, aliens, UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids, that kind of thing. But more importantly, the people that have seen these strange things. So they call in with their 5-minute story. It's in the form of a voicemail. I kind of share the story and talk about it compared to historical experiences other people have had or other experiences I've received. And we have a good time with it. We share probably 10, 15 different calls per episode.
That's interesting. I was wondering how you pulled off a call-in show because, for one, it's hard to get an audience that's reliable to call in.
Very true.
But for two, on top of that, you have times. It's hard to pick the right time for everybody. But this call in and leave a message, I really like that. That's a
allows
smart
me
way to do it.
It is, because it allows me to edit down the calls. I can get a lot of the ums out, a lot of the spaces, and kind of get to the meat and potatoes of what took place. And then we can move on to another story. I know people have short attention spans these days. So the quicker we can get through a story and move on to the other, the better, I think. And we want to try to cover as much ground as possible per episode. And this really helps us do that.
Right. And then Blurry Photos, great name, gotta say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very clever name. What is the format of that podcast?
Blurry Photos, I started out with a host back in 2012, and at the beginning of 2018, I flew solo because the host left to pursue life, having a kid, getting married, all that good stuff.
All the boring stuff.
What I try to do is pick a topic of paranormal nature, Forteana, anything weird in history, famous figures and things like that. And I try to do as much research as I can and present the topic, and then present each side of the case, as it were. So I like to say I'm open-minded about this. I want to learn about it. But every time I do the research and look into the stuff, there always seems to be some kind of explanation or something that, people are either looking past or they don't want to accept.
Right.
So I try to be balanced in my approach to the storytelling, but also give people a scientific view of it. I guess I'm just kind of skeptical in nature. So, if there is something to be explained, I will let it explain itself.
Right. So your format is a bit more of a deep dive into a single topic.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I'm skeptical in the same way. I talk to people, obviously, at least once a week doing this. And I came to this paranormal stuff. My audience is going to roll their eyes that I'm telling the story again, but you're new. And I came to this paranormal stuff through a love of fiction. And then I dug deeper into the fiction, and you eventually ask yourself, is it possible any of this stuff could be real? And, and I assume most skeptics came to it that way, but how did you guys come to it? Let's start with you, David, because you were just saying that you were a skeptic.
Well, for me, it was, I would say it was similar to your path in that I really have always been interested in mythology, and different cultures, their different mythologies are incredibly interesting, but the monsters in particular are always so fun to read about. And
were you a D&D kid?
D&D, absolutely. Yeah, magic, all that good stuff. Yeah. And even the toys monsters in my pocket, if you remember back in the 80s, that had a profound influence, because here you have all these cryptids and creatures of mythology, and there's a little snippet about their history and stuff on there. And just wanting to know more. And yeah, like you, is there any truth to this stuff? I want to know about these things, these conspiracies, these, just amazing facts. So that's how I approached it.
Some people get pulled to it from experiences. What was it for you, Derek?
I actually was an experience. I was about 10 years old. I saw what can only be described as a black panther in southeast Ohio. Essentially, it was just like that's what it was. It was a black panther. It was a huge monster of an animal, black as coal, fast, heavy, a big creature. We saw it. I told my father about it. He'd seen it before and just didn't tell us about it. That kind of was the catalyst to get me going. I started reading a bunch of books, children's books, of course, at the time. And it's kind of just like a gateway drug at that point. It's just introduced me to Bigfoot, UFO, aliens, that sort of thing. So basically, once the floodgates were open, it was just kind of soaking up all the information I can get my hands on. And I never really did take the fiction angle. It was always nonfiction for me.
Right. Right. Yeah, well, that probably makes an interesting combination of storytelling and observation as you guys are going out doing these things that one is coming from imagination and one is coming from factualization. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's a big crossover between the two at this point,
Yeah.
But, I'm sure that creates different perspectives for telling a story.
Oh, for sure. David's definitely the research guy. He's the guy that's going to, dig into the books and get all the stories for us. And I'm the guy that's going to go out in the field and say, oh, well, this track is this track and this track is that track, or something could live here, something can't live here. Look at the terrain logically, look at the environment logically, and see what the possibilities are there for something to sustainably live.
Right. Okay. So let me try saying this again. The Borrego Triangle.
That's right.
You got it.
So what is the Borrego Triangle? Should I be directing this at one or the other, or does one feel that they have a better answer?
Well, I feel like we'll probably bounce back and forth on this one.
All right,
I'll kick it off here, David, if that's fine. Essentially, if anyone's familiar with Southern California, there's a state park called Anza-Borrego State Park, and it's essentially the largest state park in the state of California. And it's got all kinds of different microclimates. There's mud caves, there's badlands, there's palm oases, I suppose I should say. Just tons of different little microclimates. So I started going there, exploring, hiking, camping, that kind of thing. And anywhere I go, I'm obviously interested in the tales and legends from that area. And I started digging into it and found there was all kinds of firsthand encounters from the area of all sorts of different things, from Bigfoot, UFO, ghost lights, you name it. It's been reported there. But nothing has been written about it. There have been no documentaries made about it, no television shows, or very few television shows, I should say. So it kind of was the catalyst for me to kind of get this idea going. And that's when we roped David in, and it was kind of all downhill from there. We went out in October and actually shot it's like a 4-minute trailer for a proof of concept, basically, for what we want to do with the actual documentary.
Yeah,
so
I watched it.
We got our boots on the ground, and
very professional.
We got out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So we got out there and did some exploring. We got some connections with some people, so we're super excited to get back there and get going. But back to the question at hand, the Borrego Triangle is sort of what we started naming this area. Basically, the triangle is the perfect shape. You have the Bennington Triangle, the Bermuda Triangle. There's tons of these things. So it was kind of the go-to. We kicked around. We kick around, David? Polygon and all kinds of different shapes.
Oh yeah, Borrego Star of David.
So it is a term that you guys coined.
It is, yeah. It's just an easy way to describe the strange phenomenon that's taking place in this vast swatch of land. And this park is, it's about the size of Rhode Island, or it's a little bit smaller than Rhode Island. So it's a very large area.
When you say triangle, when you're talking about phenomena like this, people automatically get a picture in their head. It's from the Bermuda Triangle, Bridgewater, like you said, Derek. It elicits a vision to someone, or someone actually can latch onto that and know what you're talking about. Whereas if we did go with the Borrego rhomboid, people would be like, "Is that a band?"
Right. Yeah. Actually, yeah, that sounds like a band, doesn't it? In the title, in your subtitle, you say High Strangeness, and this is a term that has kind of screwed with me a bit, because I wasn't entirely sure what it meant. So I jotted out myself a question here to ask you. When you say high strangeness, do you mean single encounters that are so strange that they don't fit under things? Or in this situation, do you mean that so many different things go on there, it can only be classified as high strangeness?
Yeah,
I don't know. Is that a confusing question?
No, it's good. I know what you mean for both. To me, it's kind of a blend. Yeah. High strangeness is stuff that you can't really categorize. And when you say high strangeness just in general, it kind of encompasses a lot of stuff under that umbrella. And so to me, it's a little bit of both of what you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the second half of our interview, I definitely want to talk about, quite a bit of the experiences that have gone on there and the sorts of things that are pulling you into there. But in the meantime, here's a fun question for you, David, as a bearded man. What brand mustache wax do you use?
I use firehouse wax when I want it to really to hold,
right,
not go anywhere. So
I use
that's
Swabcedo when I'm going for it. So I was just curious if my wife picked out the same brand you got. You know, the Kickstarter thing, I've thought about this before, and I put it out there. Like I said, I'm maybe a little more of a creative, but I thought about it. Creative is just the term I use for creating fiction instead of reporting nonfiction. I know there's creativity in all, but in doing Kickstarter, I've always thought to myself, like, man, do I even have what it takes to do this? So with Kickstarter, is it hard to put yourself out there for the Kickstarter? And did you have a large social footprint when you started, or was this something that evolved? And was there a conversation where you basically told yourself, we can't put this on Kickstarter, nobody's going to give a damn, or something like that, you know? Because those are the thoughts that have gone through my head in the past. And so, I don't know, was it hard to put yourself out?
Well, the Kickstarter was difficult to begin with. I'll be honest. The learning curve of Kickstarter is hard to begin with, just to understand how you're supposed to format everything and the tiers and everything like that. That's all complicated stuff. But before we even reached that decision, David and I had to talk about, you know, we could reach out and try to get funding for this film ourselves, but that means bringing on producers and bringing on more opinions and more people that want to do certain things with the picture, and we lose our vision. In the kitchen. Yeah, basically. Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to do what we could to try to get complete control of this project. And for us, it was Kickstarter. That way, the money coming in is from our fans directly. So we know where the money's coming in. We know what they're looking for, because we've been feeding content to these guys for years now. And between the two of us, we had, thousands of Facebook followers and Instagram followers. So we had a swatch of people to kind of go out to and say, hey, like, we're doing this project. We'd love it if you can come by and at least have a look at it.
I see. Yeah. So the people were already there for you to reach out.
They were, yeah. We felt pretty confident that we were going to get it. But anytime you put yourself out there with something like this, there's always a seed of doubt in the back of your head where, people aren't going to enjoy the project, or they've never heard of this, so they're not going to back it. And that was why we put so much time and effort and frankly, money into shooting that trailer. We wanted to show people, what this place looks like. We wanted to show our abilities and prove that we can pull this thing off.
We're over 90% on it right now, and there's a part of me that's still like, I don't know, maybe not going to get there.
Yeah. No, I get you, because I don't want to talk money, but when you type in a number, it's like you when you put in that last zero, you got to go like, ooh, to hit that button.
Yeah.
You got to feel. Yeah. And for people out there, I don't want them to think that, money is how the world works. And so people need money in order to make things. It's just so incredibly hard to put yourself out there. So I'm really impressed that you guys did it, that you have such a beautiful introductory video. And I found myself watching it and being invested. So by the time I got to you guys around the campfire, I'm all, maybe I am interested in this,
Awesome. Well, it's good to hear that it worked then.
Yeah. So in this area, it's a state park. How old is the history in the Borrego Triangle? How old is this history that we're talking? Because some parts of your video, you seem to be talking about new people, new experiences. There's one where you're talking to a guy out of his Winnebago, and he's talking about what he just saw probably in weeks. And some of them you're talking about, pictographs and lithographs and stuff. So how far back are we going here?
Pretty far, because the Native American petroglyphs, like you just mentioned, there are, probably what, Derek, hundreds of years old at least?
Hundreds, and some may be close to 1,000 for all I know, but they're at least hundreds. They're before European settlers came, for at least that much.
So that plays into it, and of course the lore and the legends of the native tribes that were in the area. Then there's also there's a very rich history of ghost stories from the Old West when the stagecoach line was running through the area. And
that makes sense.
Around the stage stations, there are a ton of different kinds of stories. You get the lady in white, or one of the hitchhiking kind of ghosts that's out there. a bandit gang, that shot itself to death over some money. And
that makes sense too.
Yeah. The gold rush and stuff, how people, what greed does. And then there's also this whole cryptid aspect that dates back at least to the 1800s, and maybe if not farther with the Native American lore, depending on what you read into the stories and stuff. But the cryptid stuff, hairy hominids, the Borrego Sandman is out there, Yucca Man. Zubies, I think, is another one that they call. There's all kinds of names, and we're trying to figure out if it's all the same entity or if they're different things that are out there. But there are stories that go back to when the stage line was running through, and people would write to the newspapers about them. And of course, they're just like there are for any stories. There are some that are hoaxes, but there are some that people swear up and down that's what they saw. And then it goes on into the 60s and 70s. So it's all over the place.
We also had conquistadors come through. We had Spanish missionaries in the, I think, late 1600s come through there. So there's a lot of history through that area, believe it or not, despite the fact that it's vast, wide open wasteland. Essentially, there's been a lot of human history through there.
I was a punk kid in high school, and I was a big fan of industrial music. And I should have graduated in 1994, which was like the tail end and the beginning of the popularity. I'm getting somewhere with this. Hold on. And I was a big fan of industrial music, but by the time Marilyn Manson came out, I was like, nah, I've met too many Marilyn Manson fan stuff. This is terrible. This is stupid. Because like when I was a kid, goth kids were cutting themselves, not playing with kittens in the park and blah, blah, blah. I had preconceived notions. Years later, I listened to the music and I'm all, this is almost a dead ringer for the music that I was liking at the time. I just couldn't hear it. Yeah. So do you find more credibility and more interest in the older stories that you can't tie a face to than the newer stories that maybe you do apply a face and a life story and a life path that you can identify with? Or do you find having that face and life path in front of you adds the credibility, and the older stories you have to take with more of a grain of salt?
I honestly feel like it could go both ways very easily with a case-by-case basis. A lot of these older stories have details that we're not seeing in the contemporary sightings or the contemporary reports. These creatures, these Yucca Man or Borrego Sandman attacking people, attacking ranches and animals and stuff like that. This kind of report hasn't been made for 100 years now, but we're kind of looking at it thinking, was it more of the Wild West in terms of paranormal encounters back in the day, and it's kind of calmed down a bit now, or is it that people aren't willing to talk about it now? We're not real sure which one of those two things it is. But to answer your question, I guess for me it goes both ways. It's a case by case. If I can look somebody in the eye and they're telling me the story and I can see the truth behind their eyes, that speaks volumes to me over a newspaper article from 120 years ago.
What about you, David?
Part of the problem with that, with the old stories, is a lot of people were hoaxing things just for either a laugh or because that was kind of their entertainment at the time.
Snake oil salesman.
Yeah. Or even an April Fool's joke comes into play in one of the stories out there. But it's harder to verify the old stuff, obviously, because you don't have a lot of corroborating evidence, and you don't have a lot of what I would consider very astute science going on.
Right. Yeah.
So the newer stuff has a little bit more credibility. But at the same time, there's a lot more people that want stuff to be true these days. And so you kind of got to sift through that as well.
Yeah. It seems like people further back in history have an ignorance of science, yet they also seem to have much larger, more poetic vocabularies. So their descriptions seem to be much better. Nowadays, I don't know if it's just me, but the world seems to have a much smaller vocabulary.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely.
JK, LOL.
Right. Yeah.
Guilty. Guilty myself.
So this is A national park, like we said. And
state park. It's a state park, actually.
State park. Okay. And I'm guessing, but I don't know, is this a great place to film? Like, in the sense that, do you have to get permission? When you go camp, do you camp anywhere? Do you have freedoms out there that you might not have in other investigations?
There's a ton of BLM land around the park itself, Bureau of Land Management. Basically, that's land that anybody can use. You can camp on it for, I think, 20 days or 14 days, something like that. So there's opportunities for that. We could backcountry days and days. It's dangerous out there, though. It's the problem. If we go backcountry for a few hours, we may never come back. And somebody goes
we talking
missing.
Bear dangerous or crackhead dangerous?
Well, I'm talking 125 degrees, no water whatsoever.
We're talking Bear Grylls dangerous.
Mountain lions. There's a ton of dangers in this area. Bees alone is a danger because this is a high wildflower area. Through parts of the year, people flock from all over the country to see the wildflowers that bloom in this desert valley. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but the place is we can. I'm trying to make this sound better than it is. We have access to a lot of things in the park, but our safety is what limits us, I guess, is the best way to say it.
But no need of permission to film.
Not that we've been aware of yet. We're still getting all the T's and I's dotted and crossed and all that stuff to get all that together. But we're going to be talking with park officials and stuff like that. So we'll have all that stuff lined up by the time the production goes.
Well, I had a friend in high school who was intoxicated, and he ran a red light and hit a cop, but the cop didn't know that he was intoxicated. He played it off somehow. It wasn't alcohol. Let's move on from that. But the cop told him, "You hit the best car you could have hit." And he's all, "Well, why?" And he's just all, "Well, you already own it. You won't own it. You won't have to pay to get it fixed." And so I was kind of thinking that maybe the state park is, you already own it. Like, who's going to tell you you can't do that here? And you'd be all, "What? This is my state park."
Well, I feel like places like Anza-Borrego State Park would welcome the attention, honestly. This is just another reason for people to get out there. It's already a night sky community, which means at night they're basically dark, so you can see the Milky Way out there.
Right.
That's probably why the UFO sightings are so prevalent in that area. But I feel like they embrace, basically, it's a huge art community as well. So they're going to embrace this. I feel like the desert communities out there are going to have a good time with this.
So there is a community out there. So there are locals.
Yeah. There's a few small pockets. I think the hub, at least the hub we've been operating from, is Borrego Springs, which is right by the park, not the park entrance, but the visitor center and the headquarters and all that's kind of located right there. But like I said, it's a big art community. They have little shops and art studios and stuff like that. It's a cool little area. Yes, tons of sculptures. They've commissioned a lot of these metal sculptures. There's what is that thing, 500 foot, David? That dragon? There's a 500-foot dragon made out of metal that's just basically digging up out or climbing up out of the ground. It's incredible.
Horses, all kinds of cool stuff.
It's just a weird place. It just is.
Well, I live in an exceptionally artsy community as well. I just moved from Northern California. I now live here in Ashland, Oregon, which is famous for its Shakespeare Festival and all sorts of art stuff. And I can see them being very receptive to something out of the norm that I was interested in doing because of the community, So you gotta appreciate that.
Yeah, people like to embrace stuff like that. If where they live is a little bit different, a lot of people like to flock to that, like to tout that and share that with other people, and it's a reason for people to come visit and bring money into the small communities.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of one of our hopes with this too, is that it kind of bumps up some tourism in the area, and hopefully it doesn't get annoying for anybody there, but it really kind of helps them in that community if people are going out there saying, "Well, I heard that there are some UFOs or like Dog Men running around here. I want to check it out, and I'll eat at your restaurant. I'll buy some art." Who knows?
If somebody opens a ghost tour or cryptid tour after this film is released, we'll be so happy, because that's kind of the goal we're after. Is get people involved in what's going on out there, because no one has really been talking about it, and there's incredible things that have happened there.
I'm sure somebody will, if for no other reason. By the time your film is done, you will have provided them a map.
Hopefully, that's also part of the plan. Yeah.
Oh, part of the trouble that we run into is that it's so big that it takes about an hour to get from one spot to the next.
Well, are you allowed to use a vehicle out there?
Yeah. We had a 4-wheel drive truck. We were taken out to a lot of the mud caves and stuff. We got to really do some off-roading, and we have access to drones, filming drones and stuff. So that really makes that's the thing that's really going to make the production, because we can see things that we can't reach on foot or by vehicle. We can simply fly over a couple mountain ranges, and suddenly we see this little pocket of stuff that would take us a day and a half to hike there or something. So it kind of opens some doors for us as far as investigating goes and actually filming.
I see. So earlier you alluded a bit to UFO sightings due to the clear skies, which I'm seeing here quite a bit in my new home, more than I did at my old. What are, some of the sightings? Of course, it's weird. I think we covered it already. It's weird that there's a Bigfoot and a UFO. 2 guests ago, I had a guy on about his book, Quantum Bigfoot, which is like about Bigfoot possibly being an interdimensional traveler. But UFO sightings, what out there would be drawing the ufologist?
There are, the skies being clear themselves is a big draw, I think, for people they can see. But there are several military bases around the area, which you can go either way with belief on, whether or not these UFOs are man-made or extraterrestrial. Let's see, Derek, there's when we were out there filming, I think you remember this. We definitely came across some black helicopters.
Oh yeah, several times
here and there.
Yeah.
And this was when we were rock hopping in the middle of the Badlands out there.
We're miles away from the main road, and suddenly this big black helicopter. There was several of them actually that circled through our area,
flying low. And,
low.
Could have been training exercises. Who knows?
Of course, but it's still strange.
Yeah. I don't know what would draw them out there. That's something that we could actually look into in this film.
Is there a history of UFO sightings out there? That a UFOgrapher would chase. Saying like, "Hey."
Of course, yeah. There's tons. We actually made an interactive map of all the sightings, and we labeled each one of them differently. So a little pin represents like a UFO sighting, and there's just tons of UFO sightings right in this little triangle. And they're describing things from white, kind of like the Tic Tac video that's been going around for years now. Little white orbs of, they're not really light. There's some sort of object that's floating around. Saucer-shaped things. There's a few, like the wedge triangle-shaped, triangle-shaped black UFOs. There's a few of those have been sighted. It's a lot of variety. And like David said, I think it has a lot to do with the proximity to a lot of different military bases in that area. I think they're 200 miles from like 4 or 5 different bases. That kind of activity alone is you're going to mistake experimental aircraft with UFOs. And then also it's entirely possible that maybe something's coming in to investigate what we're doing as far as these bases are concerned. This is a bit of a conspiracy theory, but if UFOs are here visiting, maybe they're going to want to see what's going on out there in the desert as well.
Sure. An extra capital on the U in the UFO.
Exactly.
Okay, so one thing that always hops out at me when I think about cryptids is I think, well, like I was telling you about the quantum Bigfoot kind of thing. And a big part of my questioning there was like, okay, well, is Bigfoot an animal, or is it something that's using technology to do this? So a big part of the cryptid argument is supernatural versus evolutionary, stuff like that, like a, zoo escape with the panther, hidden living fossils, all sorts of stuff, But Dog Men does not fit any sort of evolutionary deal. Yet they seem to be such a regular topic, So what's kind of the history of Dog Men sightings out there? Because that was definitely a part of your pitch of what you got going on here, and I'm real curious about that one.
Well, I'll be honest, the Dogman phenomena was sort of something that we stumbled upon while we were out there. We did tons of research before we actually went out to shoot the trailer, and I'd heard reports of surrounding areas having Dogman encounters. There's a place near Palm Springs, which I think is about 60 miles from Anza-Borrego, and there's several different dogman encounters from that area. But when we talked to this gentleman Coyote that you see in the trailer there, he talked about his friend seeing one on the other side of Salton Sea, which is a large body of salt water that's right outside of Anza-Borrego. So again, we don't know if that's something that people see there often. There's a handful of reports that we've received and that we've uncovered in our research, but anything's possible. I mean, a lot of people talk about these window areas being a thin veil. There being a thin veil between this world and the next, whatever the next happens to be. And if it is, like you said, another dimension possibly, maybe these things are slipping through that, and places like here, Sedona or Point Pleasant are just a bit thinner.
But is the skeptic rational mind in you? Don't you think it's like really weird that the other dimension would be occupied with dog people?
100%. Yeah. I mean,
it
makes no sense, but
animal hybrids at all. Yeah.
Because don't get me wrong, I love this stuff and I want it to be real. So I don't mean to be making fun of anybody out there who had an experience. That's not what I'm saying. I would love a lot of this stuff to be real, but it's hard for me to wrap my brain around dogmen.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, it's my favorite cryptid, and I still have a really difficult time not only believing in it, but swallowing a lot of these pills that I hear. But the stories are so fascinating. They're so amazing. And this creature is so amazing. I just, I hate to admit it, but I might put a little bit of that to the curb and just kind of go with the story more than thinking that it's a real thing.
Sure. And you got to ask yourself, everybody's all, that's anecdotal evidence. But, how much anecdotal evidence do you have to throw on a scale for it to tip it? It's and when there's a lot on there, like we've had Linda Godfrey on our show, and she's sort of famous in the Dogman werewolfish community. Sure. And she had a lot of interesting things to say about him. Kara is all about the Dogmen. Kara's favorite is Mothman, and to me, those are kind of supernatural ones. So they're kind of hard for the hard science guy in me to really get my hands around. But in there, you also cite hairy hominids separately, which I assume is more of like a Bigfoot sighting or something like that.
I'll hit this real quick, David, and you can hit the back end of that if you don't mind. That was something I was going to bring up a second ago, was that maybe people seeing these quote unquote dogmen are actually seeing the Borrego Sandman. Now, this thing's described as being much more gaunt, skinny than the other Sasquatch in the rest of the world, or I'm sorry, I should say America. It's if it has that appearance, if it looks skinnier, is somebody going to look at that and think, oh, it's an upright dog? Is there just something about the appearance that makes people think that? It's also said to be like a light tan color, which would be beneficial in the desert. That's the main color out there. When
I was thinking that about the black helicopters. I'm like, why would you want that?
Yeah, exactly. They stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
So it's possible that somebody is seeing this Yucca Man or this Borrego Sandman and just mistaking it for what they heard about the Dogman, Beast of Bray Road, that kind of thing. David, if you want to piggyback on that at all.
There's a few encounters where they actually say that they have seen a face on these hominids. And some people go so far as to say they actually mistake them for people out there, maybe like old prospectors or, who knows what. But when they get up close to them, they see, no, this isn't the face of a man. It's some kind of beast that has very human facial features. And from our research, it doesn't really seem like there's much crossover between Dogmen and Sasquatch, just because the faces are two distinct things. You've got the long snout on this hand, you've got a flat human-like face over here. So a lot of times it's people catching a glimpse of something, and it's this hulking form, very hairy, still kind of gaunt though, like Derek said. And if you only see it from the back or the side or in a flash or running across the highway or something, it could be either of those things. But that's what we found so far.
Last year, we had Lyle Blackburn on to talk about the Bishopville Lizard Man. And one topic that we discussed was that there are Sasquatch hominid sightings down there, and that maybe the mud was clumped in the hair to the point where it looked like scales. So there's lots of different ways that, I can guarantee you I'm going to look at something differently if I'm looking right at it than if I'm looking back while running, right? Which is pretty much how you're going to go into this. The horror movie fanatic in me, you say two in there, the Sandman, I think you're saying, and then Yucca Man. And so Yucca, of course, makes me think of this great post-nuclear old horror film called The Beast of Yucca Flats that I just loved. But in the case of both of these, are we dealing with, we think, of course, we don't know what we're dealing with, but these are Sasquatch-style hominid sightings?
That's what it seems to be. And these sightings have been reported for hundreds of years in this area, not only from the Native Americans, but like I said earlier, the Spanish missionaries that came through the area. They reported not only the Native Americans telling them about it, but there's a few reports we found of them describing these creatures themselves. So we don't know, of course, we don't know what they are, but it seems to be the same creature that's in this area. It just has a different name depending on which little region. If you're near Joshua Tree National Park, they call him Yucca Man up there. If you go to closer to San Diego, it gets a lot more green and more lush through that area, and they call them Zoobies up there. And that seems to be a very active area still, whereas the deserts seem to have dropped off a bit as far as these upright hominid sightings are concerned.
David, you referred to Zoobies earlier. Is Zoobies a singular name or a plural one?
From what I've read, it's a plural one because a lot of that comes from one family's story. If I remember correctly, there's a family, a doctor, I think it was, that was living up in the hills outside of San Diego, and there was several of these creatures that were messing with him and his family. I don't recall if they were necessarily dangerous or if he felt fear from them. I think it was a lot of mutual curiosity, if you take my meaning there. So there was a lot of research done by the time, and I think there was a sheriff or Derek, wasn't there a law enforcement or was it a journalist? Somebody covered that story specifically.
I think there was some sort of police involvement. I remember a lot of these tend to run together, especially if you don't have the information in front of you. But there was some sort of involvement with law enforcement doing some sort of investigation. And I think they had an experience. This was near the town of Julian, California, I believe.
Yeah. And so a lot of what we know about Zoobies in particular comes from that. And in that one, it definitely seemed like there were multiple entities involved.
Yeah. Right. And some of the reports list that there's, several of these creatures in one experience.
Yeah. The Borrego Sandman too. There was an account of a family living in a cave that someone happened upon. And they, kind of yelled him away.
Well, again, that helps the science skeptic in me because, you think, okay, the first thing any science angle cryptid researcher is probably going to think is breeding populations.
Yeah, reproduction.
Right. All right, so let's move on with ghosts. And, I have them here together as ghosts and ghost lights. These are separated in your explanation of the thing. So let's start with ghost lights. And why is that separate of ghosts?
Well, these ghost lights have been reported in this area. First of all, ghost lights are reported all over the world. There's several places here in the U.S. with ghost lights. Brown Mountain Lights, Paulding Light. Brown Mountain Lights are in North Carolina, Paulding Light in Michigan. I'm blanking on the others. There's Marfa Lights in Texas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Michigan one I've heard of.
And they all seem to be a little bit different. They're just lights that appear out of nowhere with no explanation, and they all look a little different colors, different shapes. And the ones here at Anza-Borrego seem to be fireballs that shoot up into the sky about 100 feet, and they just fall back down, and this kind of repeats. And that's how they've been described. There's actually a very famous encounter with one of these ghost lights that actually took a human life. It was back in, I want to say 1974, 75, mid-70s either way. There was a train running through there. And right along Interstate 8, which is real close to the Mexican-U.S. border, there is a train trestle. And it's the largest wooden train trestle in the United States. It's called the Goat Canyon Trestle.
That's terrifying if it's a passenger train.
Wait till you see it. So, like I said, in 1975, they were running a train through there, and the conductor looks across the trestle and sees the ghost light. So he calls back to the brakeman, you got to lock it up. So he locks up the brakes.
Thinks there's a train coming at him.
He thinks there's a train coming his way. Mm-hmm. So he derails the train, kills the brakeman. And to this day, you look at the bottom of the trestle and you can still see some of the train cars down there. They couldn't get out. So, of course, once the investigation takes place, they realized there was absolutely no train and no reason for a light. So they attributed this crash to the actual ghost light in this area. And that's one of the phenomenons that's got me most excited about the area, is just checking out this ghost light. That's something that fascinates me.
It seems to straddle a couple of different categories, like you were saying, Chauncey. It's UFOs in one sense, and it's also kind of paranormal and ghost in another.
That's precisely what I was about to say. Is it hard to put that into one or the other, or when you're looking at it, do you have to take everything into consideration? It's like,
yeah. I guess it's easy for me because I just take ghost lights in general and put them in their own category, separate from UFOs, separate from ghosts. It's just ghost light phenomenon, right. And even then you have subcategories within that, but. It's easier for me to just wrap my mind around all this stuff if I keep them separated like that.
Now, this is a broad question. It may go outside the span of your guys' movie, so you're welcome to tell me. I don't know. But is there more of a connection to ghost lights, to UFO sightings, or to paranormal sightings?
I feel like it's paranormal.
Yeah, I would agree.
What do you think?
I don't think it's piloted by an alien or anything like that. I think it's either a natural phenomenon or possibly a ghostly phenomenon, but I think it's probably something natural if you really want my opinion.
Because when you read about this stuff, a lot of times when they do group it with something else, it'll be alongside something like Will o' the Wisps, mm-hmm. or Foo Fighters, St. Elmo's Fire, things like that.
Swamp gas, kind of.
Swamp gas, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And as far as the natural argument and paranormal and preternatural, I always I think of the band Love and Rockets, and they have a line that says you can't go against nature, because if you do, going against nature is part of nature too. And it's like, or Tony Stark saying magic is just science he hasn't figured out yet, something like that.
Yeah. I feel like all this stuff is that, right? It's all magic until we figure it out.
Right. Yeah. Indistinguishable from science and magic. Kara would be able to tell me who said it, but
Asimov, maybe.
Yeah.
Or Bradbury, one of those guys.
Sounds good. Yeah. Recently, she's been all about Max Planck and the way that science progresses one funeral at a time. So we're missing out on some good humor here. Okay, and then finally, our last big dive into experiences there would be ghosts. Now, as soon as you said that these ghost stories were coming out of the Old West, that made sense to me. Anything older, I don't really know. Native American stuff is very difficult for me to I think it's difficult for everybody to learn about, because we live in a time where everybody wants to clump them together and say, hey, those are Native Americans. Mm-hmm. But actually they were drastically different. When you look at, I know this is a terrible way to put it, but a lot of street names and stuff will be named after Native American stuff. And when you come from down south where you are, you hear a certain type of pronunciation, but you go up to Washington and you see Puyallup, and it's an entirely different language, and it makes you think it must be an entirely different culture. But I guess where I'm going with this is, did any of the ghost stuff come from before the Old West?
Not very much right now.
Nothing that hops to mind.
You could say yes, because there's tales of people going out there looking for gold and dying in the desert. There's supposedly satchels of gold somewhere from a mule train that died in the desert, got ambushed or whatever. And so you could just stumble over a bush or a rock or something out there and kick up a bunch of gold for yourself.
We're hoping anyway.
Trying.
Yeah, right. Now we know where the real motivation came for this film. We need somebody to pay us $20,000 so that we have an excuse to go stand around in the desert and kick over things that don't have snakes under them, hopefully. So most of anything having to do with ghosts would be people from the Old West referencing that in their story?
I believe it would be mostly from colonization period, or when progress, quote unquote progress, finally made its way out there.
Well, sure. Yeah,
we're hoping to speak with some, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We're hoping to speak to some tribes out there, some different reservations, and get some insight from them as well as to what's been going on there longer than, the Europeans have been there. There has to be legends. There has to be stories, ghost stories. We just haven't uncovered them, and it's a resource that we haven't really stumbled upon yet. How to find these stories, I guess.
Sure. And I've heard that the what we take as entertainment and something we're trying to figure out scientifically, I think one case would be skinwalkers with the Navajo. I have heard that they don't really like people using what would be part of their spirituality for anything other than spirituality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So very tight-lipped about a lot of that stuff.
Right. But some of them just aren't that. And when I say them, I mean the types of stories. Some of them are not connected spiritually. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you'd be able to find information there. Now, was there a big Old West presence in the area? Because when I think of gold, I don't really think of down there. I think of further up the state.
It's the area is pretty rich in quartz. So I think a lot of people have tried their hand at finding gold, and there are some mines out there in that area. I know a stagecoach line ran through the middle of it, a pretty big one, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Butterfield line, I believe it was
called. And then of course you've got that train line that runs in probably in the late 1800s. But as far as, I think there was a decent amount of gold, but it's not as famous as you would say have in the mines in the silver mines in Nevada, or some of the stuff up in Northern California and Sutter's Mill and things like that. It's not, I don't think it's quite as popular as those places, but I'm pretty sure they did some stuff.
I think a lot of the gold that's reportedly missing in the park is gold that was traveling through the park, not necessarily gold that was, mined from the park.
Maybe from Arizona.
Yeah, exactly. On its way to LA, basically.
Yeah.
Now, earlier you made a reference to there being a lot of quartz, and there seems to be a lot of paranormal quartz comparisons. I've heard people say one of the cryptid things that I really liked. For one, I watched a show called Primeval, which was terrible, but I loved it anyway. And one of them was somebody trying to tell me that the Loch Ness Monster, basically due to the way that quartz lines the loch, that it's actually creating time portals, and the Loch Ness Monster makes appearances because it's just accidentally swimming through a time portal from its own time, popping up every once in a while, and every once in a while it might go through it. So is there a comparison with the quartz?
Some kind of connection.
Yeah. I mean, of course, this is well into the realm of speculation. I get that.
Sure. That's the best realm to be in. I think there's something at least worthy of research with that, because we have been hearing this pop up a lot, especially lately. And they even covered it in the second season of Hellier, if you ever watched that one.
I did. Yeah.
And, they mentioned that being down there in Somerset in Kentucky. And I think it's very interesting. I think that's a really cool and rich place scientifically to explore, just in terms of what can quartz do, what's it capable of, and could this tie into some of this phenomena we're seeing, because it actually ties in some to the ghost lights with the desert winds kicking up. There have been some scientific studies done where that can cause some static electricity and things like that. So that could explain, at least part of that. But I love the idea of having some kind of time portal out there or something.
Yeah. I forget who told it to me. It wasn't even on the show, but it stuck with me because of that show, Primeval. I'm all like, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I like this other stuff. Why not this one?
Yeah.
So have you guys, you two have spent quite an amount of time out there walking around in the dark in the day, I assume. Have you guys confronted anything that made you go, wow, other than the black helicopters?
Well, I did. David wasn't with me for this. I actually went camping, it was over a year ago with my wife. We just went for overnight. We wanted to get out of town for a day. So we went to Anza-Borrego. And there's a place called Tamarisk Grove, it's on the list of one of the most haunted campsites in America, but I couldn't find a lot of backstory on it. So that's something else we really wanted to dig into. But as we were sitting there at the campfire late at night, I'd actually come back from doing some investigating at some of the places we talked about in the trailer. We could hear in the woods next to us bipedal footsteps, and we'd hear them until we would, talk about them, and they'd stop. And if we would just kind of go about our business for a couple minutes, we'd hear them again. And this continued throughout the night. And we never did really figure out exactly what it was. I don't think it was a humanoid or anything like that, but it was ironic that we were at a quote unquote haunted campsite, and we did hear some strange footsteps. I don't know what it was, but it was a small encounter that I had there.
And I assume you're still married.
Oh, yeah.
So you can't be too crazy. She stuck around. So
she just doesn't know any better, I guess.
Right. Okay, well, we're not too far here from the end of the show, so I'd like to talk a little bit about how people can find out more about you, where they can get information, where they can contribute. A lot of this is going on the Kickstarter page, but how about what they get when they contribute? That's a part of the Kickstarter platform, so how's that work?
If folks listening want to go to Kickstarter.com and search for Shadows in the Desert, that is the name of the documentary, and that'll pop up for you. We're about 2 weeks from the end of the campaign, and every little bit helps for sure. We're asking for 20,000 right now, and that's going to be very bare bones to do anything with that. But we have a couple of stretch goals that will help us do more, and the more we get, the better the quality of it will be. As far as some of the tiers for that, there's if you give it the $10 level, you get a podcast that's exclusive to this project, and Derek and I will be putting out this podcast every other week from the time that it funds until, probably through the finish of the project and maybe even the release.
I see. So that's like an insider investor updates.
Exactly.
Let them know that
behind the scenes
you're killing it. Yeah.
What's going on. And we also have a couple of backpacks that we want to put together with some curated items, things from around the area, keepsakes and other things that we think would be cool, mementos and souvenirs from there, and other things that we experience. Those are a couple of them. You can get your name in the credits. What am I leaving out, Derek? There's art.
You can be a producer, executive, or associate producer. There's different levels for that. We're looking at T-shirts, patches. We have some pretty big names in the cryptid art world that we're reaching out to now to get some T-shirts and some art made, posters, that kind of thing.
Idea. Yeah.
So we're trying to involve the cryptid community as much as possible, or I guess I should say the paranormal. It doesn't have to just be cryptid. We're trying to involve them as much as possible. Get some art from some people from around the community, and try to spread the message and teach people about this. It's really what we want to do. We want to share this place that we discovered and get people to get on board and realize all the strange stuff that's happening there. And in order to do that, we need a little bit of money, and we need some time, and get in there and shoot some stuff.
And another thing that's, regardless is if you donate to the Kickstarter or not, we are looking for stories and experiences from people in the area, or if anybody has had anything happen to them down around in there, please let us know. Either go to our Facebook pages or websites, or however, we're out there, Monsters Among Us and Blurry Photos. Either one will take any of your experiences. You can actually call Derek's show, leave a voicemail telling it. Derek, what's that number?
It's just leave it in the form of a voicemail and mention at the beginning that it's associated with Anza-Borrego or the documentary, and I can find it. The phone number is 1-888-608-NIGHT. It's 1-888-608-NIGHT. It's a toll-free call throughout the U.S. So just give us a call and tell us what you saw and what you experienced. If you want to leave your contact information, that'd be great. Then we can reach out, maybe do an interview over Skype or something like that.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, it's very very exciting, very inspiring. And as far as people from the area, we have another member of our show who's really our behind the scenes person who you communicated with before me, Andrea. Mm-hmm. And she was really excited that you guys were from in her area, so I'm sure she's invested in this as well.
Yeah. I hope she has an experience for us.
Well, she's all about walking around the desert around her house, and at least 3 or 4 times a week, she's posting up crazy airplanes flying by and asking our friend Jake, who was in the military, what they are. So she's invested in looking.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for being on the show. If you're in the audience listening and you didn't catch that information, all that information will be available on Radio Wasteland, our Facebook, across the board, and all that stuff. You've been listening to David and Derek here about their upcoming film that will happen because you're so close to the bare bones. Shadows in the Desert. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Chauncey.
Thank you.